right. And I believe we are live.
Yep.
Welcome, Dre.
Hey, nice to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, man. This is Exit Liquidity, episode. I've
55.
literally 55.
55.
All right. It's been
55.
like 4 weeks and I still, cannot get the number right. Today we have Andrej from Grass Network from Wynd Network, Wynd with a Y. A team that we have definitely been following along with for some time. I think Cedo is definitely a big fan of Grasses, so this should be an exciting one. Dre, just to get started, I would love to hear a little bit about your background. Maybe if you could give us a little bit of an intro about who you are and what your background looks like.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to. So I actually started my career in TradFi. I mostly did like quant trading stuff around OTC markets in the macro space. Prior to that, I did my education in computational physics. At some point, I kind of went back to grad school, fell into the crypto rabbit hole, ran a small startup with like 1,100 customers that was focused on like web scraping scaling solutions. Somewhere along that timeline, met my co-founders and we began working on Grass, and here we are.
Nice, short and to the point. I love it. What about like crypto specifically? Have you been involved in any other projects, communities in the past? Either even like just as a user, anything you've enjoyed?
Yeah. Honestly, in the beginning, I had a lot of fun with on-chain crypto derivatives. There's just like all kinds of opportunity for arbitrage, whether you're arbitraging like incentives or just literally prices of things. It was pretty amazing, honestly, to see like all these rails that you become very familiar with in TradFi being deployed by just random people on the internet in a very permissionless and composable manner. And then like watching that expand over the last few years into like this whole area of DeepIn and AI and like other use cases, and seeing how that how that's being extended to like the rest of the world, and how we can incentivize other types of behaviors on chain has been like honestly pretty fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Derivatives has definitely been an interesting one to watch evolve. We had like a good chunk of some of the top derivatives projects on here, maybe like over the summer. So it was really cool to see kind of the development and hear their stories. Before we get into things, we have a bit of like a rite of passage here on Exit Liquidity. Before we can get into anything pod related, we have got to get your favorite story, or your favorite moment of when you were Exit Liquidity in this industry.
Of when I was Exit Liquidity. So I don't know if this counts as I don't know if this counts as Exit Liquidity, but I participated in a Doge faucet in 2014. And I lost
faucet.
Yeah. I think it's worth like a few $1,000,000 now, the amount of Doge that I accumulated in some hot wallet that I registered for using my undergraduate student email. I lost access to that email address for years. And during the last bull run, when I saw Doge ripping, I reached out to like the guidance department or whatever it was at the university. And I asked them, hey, can you guys like reactivate my email just for 5 minutes? I need to log into something. And it turned out that I had to like register for a program to do that. So I started doing the cost benefit analysis of like, do I pay tuition to register for a program so I can access the Doge in that wallet just to drop out? And then it turned out, then I found out that the company that was hosting like these hot wallets got rugged anyway around that time.
Oh man,
I didn't go through with it, but yeah, that's more of like an opportunity lost than it was Exit Liquidity. But I'm sure that probably counts somewhere around the same domain.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Definitely an interesting one as well. I've had issues with that, with like transitioning from student to like not student, but like that's definitely like, blows anything I've dealt with way out of the water. All right, cool. So getting a little bit more into what you're spending your time on these days. I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about like what the difference between Grass and like Wynd is. I think most people are pretty familiar with Grass, but I think not a lot of people know about Wynd specifically, and like what it does that Grass doesn't, or vice versa.
Yeah. I'm happy to answer that question. So essentially, Wynd is just the team behind Grass. So like we're going to be renaming it Wynd Labs sometime soon, just to help alleviate that misconception, I suppose. But yeah, like the original idea, like the reason we named it Wynd Network in the first place was we wanted to build this like core piece of infrastructure for web data. And we realized that in order to do this in a scalable and like ethical manner, we needed participation from literally millions of consumers around the world. And we felt Wynd Network wasn't the most consumer friendly name. And we felt something like Grass could achieve a certain level of virality. So we decided that like the protocol would be called Grass, and just like Wynd is kind of this legacy name of the team building it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the Grass definitely has some more virality to it. It's one of probably my favorite like marketing plays in crypto at the moment. You have a pretty interesting story, and Ali touched on like how long I feel like I've been following along. You had some pretty the journey seems very interesting to me, to build something like this and to want to build something like this. Can you tell me a little bit about the initial start, kind of the initial conversations you've had? I've seen some of your tweets. You know, you've had people probably raising for L1 surrounding you, and some people telling you that this isn't going to work. What was that journey like? What was the initial feedback? How'd you find that? What was it like feeling that initial product market fit?
It's a great question. Yeah, early, like in the very, very early days, I mentioned earlier that I was running a small like web scraping scaling startup. We were hosting a bunch of infrastructure in like bare metal servers in Ashburn, Virginia, and like we were hosting things like proxies and like cloud and like whatever people needed to like help them make their web scraping like 10 to 100 to 1,000 times bigger. And this went pretty well, but we always ran into the same problem that like we were hosting these solutions on data center networks, and most websites, when you decide to like scrape public web data, like a lot of them will either really quickly rate limit data center IP addresses or just like block those networks from connecting to their websites. And we realized, okay, like there are solutions to this that are residential. You can go and build a residential network to go and scrape the public web. And I remember looking at this and seeing like what some of the incumbents were doing. And like there were incumbents doing this. Like there are literally huge data companies out there that are scraping terabytes of data on a daily basis. And not just data companies, but like data divisions of large Fortune 500 companies. But the way they were doing this was actually paying like middleware companies to install SDKs into people's free applications. So like, I'm talking things like VPNs, screensavers, stuff like that. Anything to monetize like the experience for developers. And what you ended up having was like a developers getting paid tons of money to install these things like in your free applications. And people were running these applications at home and having their network resources sold out from under them in order for someone to go and gather, like basically like browse the web and like gather all kinds of information, structure into data sets and like derive some sort of insights from it. And these consumers were just not being compensated. I remember looking at that and thinking, okay, like this is, if it's not a ticking time bomb, then at the very least it's unethical and not very scalable, because you end up facing things like app stores shutting you down and like you have to keep finding new developers, and the experience didn't seem like it would make a lot of sense to me. So we figured, okay, well, crypto economics lend themselves very nicely to bootstrapping a network like this. And like the thing with web scraping is when you're scraping web servers globally, you need a globally distributed network. And you don't just need like 1,000 of these nodes to make something like this work. You need millions of them. So we initially set out to build this like key piece of infrastructure for web scraping. And the initial feedback or the initial reception was like how, it was one of those things we reached out to people, we're okay, we're going to build this. We need at least 100,000 people for it to work. Or like we need at least 1 million people or whatever it was, depends on the geography. And the initial reception was like, yeah, good luck. Because like not only do you have to go and like source like use cases for this, you also have to source the people that are actually going to come and download it. And like, how are you going to download things? Thankfully, like, we've seen this like big uptick in like these points programs. And back in June, we figured, you know what? we can do this with a points program that heavily incentivizes referrals. And we managed to take a referral gated platform from, an initial wait list of 500 users to almost 1 million today, which is pretty exciting to see. And, like along the way, we've seen this like massive new problem arise when it comes to data curation. And we realize like, building infrastructure for like collecting data for AI models and like machine learning applications wasn't really enough. Like we realized, when people curate massive data sets to go into AI models, not only are you not only is there data poisoning happening by web servers that are trying to like block these crawlers and scrapers, but there's also data poisoning happening by advertisers now that are going in and altering data sets after they become open source, like paying these people that are building these data sets to like sneak things into them so that an AI is trained and biased to prefer one company over another. So we realized that across the entire data layer, like there are tons of problems to be solved, and we're positioned very well to come and start tackling them. So yeah, that's how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's a huge feat, especially in this industry. Having 1 million users in any program is pretty remarkable. I want to touch on, you did a good job explaining kind of grass and a little bit of that like North Star. Essentially from a high level, and this isn't the most technical podcast out there, but from a high level, Grass's aim is to kind of accumulate that unused bandwidth and the data scraping and eventually sell it. How does that work from a high level? Is there like an analogy for bandwidth or data here that kind of helps people understand what's happening under the hood?
Yeah. So by setting up a Grass node, you're actually not only providing some amount of bandwidth for scraping and crawling the public web, but you're also providing a small amount of CPU. And I guess in terms of analogies, you can think of Grass as something similar to Hive Mapper. But instead of mapping streets, we're mapping websites on the internet. So like, right now in this beta, we're actively scraping language data from all over the public web, applying whatever necessary pre-processing steps there are to that data, whether it's like a transform or just cleaning out HTML or anything like that. And then we're shipping it for ingestion into a wide ranging number of models. And yeah, actually at the moment, we're probably the largest decentralized data protocol by user count. But yeah, it's also one of those things where as you scale, the unit economics actually become quite a bit better. Like also similar to Hive Mapper, like if you have 10 cars mapping a small number of streets, how valuable is that map really going to be? Whereas if you have millions of cars around the world mapping the planet, all of a sudden there's a lot of value that can accrue to that map, and your unit economics, like as an aggregate, actually become quite a bit better.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think I want to understand a little bit more about kind of like who's buying. I know that there's like, AI has been a hot topic. I understand that most of these AIs have to train on these large data sets, and most of these large data sets can look like a Reddit, kind of Quora, things like that, where those data sets are now being gated by these companies. Is that kind of who's the buyer in that sense? These AI training models?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most AI foundations, like you're not necessarily just going to buy raw data. You end up buying a vector database or like access to a vector database. That's usually some sort of monthly subscription or something similar to that. Outside of, I guess, what you'd think of as an AI lab, there's a world of companies that are trying to implement machine learning and data-driven decision-making, especially in the last year or so, ever since AI became really hot. And as they're transforming their business processes, they're realizing, okay, there's a lot of data on the internet that we actually need. So that could be a company that needs to know kind of get some sort of projection of all my competitors' pricing so that I can go and price something and undercut them before I even know what their price is going to be. Or having some sort of natural language processing to understand reviews of products across an entire space and knowing whether or not you should concentrate efforts in a certain area when it comes to like PR or marketing or whatever. You've got applications actually across financial services industries. And there's never enough data for a lot of these quant hedge funds, for instance. A lot of financial services industries, especially since LLMs came out, all of a sudden are starting to realize, hey, like a lot of our processes could be automated and also just made a lot more efficient with the use of AI. So you've got like basically, I mean, yeah, you've got AI foundations that'll go and use data sets, and we're working with a few of them to train some models together. But then outside of them, literally any company in the world that uses data, so in other words, any company in the world is buying data.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the most common like analogy that we hear today, and like the more, not in the most technical sense, but like people are always likening data to like oil in the information age. I know there's that one graphic that's been floating around as of recently from Misari, I think, that kind of showcases this like AI stack with like grass at the bottom, followed by like different levels there as well. Was because data collection, you know, has been valuable for a long time either way. Was using it with the purpose, was selling it to like AI organizations and using it to train AI always part of the plan, or was there, like closer to Grass's earlier days, was there a different vision in mind for how to use that data, who to sell it to?
Yeah, so in terms of scraping and crawling for data sets and stuff like that, that's always been part of our plan. But the way we have approached things was we're going to build the infrastructure first. Like we wanted this base layer, and that was the core focus. And that's why you probably haven't seen a lot of that, like the messaging about what we're actually doing with the network until recently. But you know, that being said, like I'm happy to share some of the other things in our pipeline, because beyond just data collection, it's one of those things where, you know, like the analogy you made to oil, like if you're drilling for oil and you control, if you're like the only one in your space that actually has the tools to get that oil, why not capture the entire value accrual? Like if there's no one else out there that's capable of, yeah, you know, getting or drilling for oil the way you're able to, you may as well go and refine it. You may as well go and sell it. You may as well do these other things with it. So we're starting to realize, like, you know, given our user base and given the fact that we're more or less the largest network that of this type, we're able to expand to other areas of data processing. So things like tagging and labeling, like those are more active participation methods that we want to add to our dashboard. And then like also within the pipeline, like we're actually training an LLM to automate a lot of the workflow. So like one thing about scraping data from websites is like every website's different. And as websites change, the way you scrape them changes. You have to like update scripts, things like that. LLMs are actually very good at this if they're trained properly. And right now, or one of the things we're exploring is actually having LLMs that can automate a lot of that for us, and then have them live inside these nodes. So you kind of end up having this agent in your node that's like kind of crawling the web, cleaning it up, and just spitting back like clean structured data to ingest right into a model.
And that's what Socrates is, right? Or is that
yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's where are we along that process right now? Just because it, like, I feel like you just described like a monster of a task, like something that is like, you know, can really really change things for the average user, as well as like the same corporations who profit off this stuff, or I guess you guys in this case. Like, what does like timeline kind of look like? What's top of mind right now for like Grass and like the new edition of the Socrates project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we only got started on it pretty recently, but we're pretty far along. At the moment, we're still in the data collection phase, but in parallel, we're working on a lot of the scaffolding for these models. So yeah, just stay tuned for that. I'm not going to promise any deadlines on the podcast, but yeah, just watch our Twitter, and we'll be coming out with some pretty exciting updates in the near future.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I am interested to talk more about like distribution specifically, or I guess like kind of how distribution went for you guys over the past year or so, because, you know, like you really can't understate the impact of having 1 million users and in this space especially, but obviously I think grass is a little bit past that even. There's, at least I know people that I've referred who aren't, they don't have a clue how it works. They're not into crypto or anything like that, but they are running grass nodes and they like to watch their points counter go up. How I know you mentioned that there was like a heavy emphasis on referrals early on in the process. What was kind of the thought process there in terms of like bringing this thing to market? I know there was a closed, I believe like a closed invite only beta as well before you guys opened it up a little bit more gradually. I would just like to hear a little bit about like your thought process throughout that.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that's, I suppose you could say it's unique to our product. I wouldn't say unique, but special about it is the fact that you don't really need any upfront capital to join the network. Unlike a lot of projects in crypto, like, across the DeFi space, you usually have to buy some piece of hardware. In DeFi, you have to go and like spend a certain amount of gas to like qualify for something. We were very cognizant of the fact that our network is actually free to join, because you already paid for your internet connection, you already paid for your device. All the resources that you need are actually already there. And this is only using a very, very tiny amount of those resources. So given the fact that it's free, we took the approach of actually not really spending money on paying like influencers or anything like that. But rather we just had a referral program that heavily incentivizes points. And we figured, given it's so simple to onboard, and like we tried to make that process as simple as possible with like the fewest number of clicks. Given how simple it is, like there's really no reason why someone shouldn't want to, unless there's like some fear they have. And then like we just worked our best to address those types of things. But yeah, it worked out pretty well. Like to your point, there were quite a few people actually that are on the network that aren't really familiar with crypto, and for a lot of them, this is going to be their first crypto, which is pretty exciting for us, because I think all of us remember like the first way we got into the space, and for us, it's like really cool to give people the platform to join the space, and then also like have some sort of exposure to AI and like all these other things at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like for me, and the biggest thing I tell people when I'm shilling them my referral is why not? Like it's not really going to have any effect on you, and you'll just silently accumulate these points for a while. And the biggest pushback that I get from that, and I know you guys touch base on this in your docs as well, I would just like to hear from you directly. The biggest thing is like privacy concerns. People are worried that having this extension on will, people are scared of things they don't understand. Could you talk a little bit about how you guys approach privacy and just like protect grass users?
Yeah, 100%. So the thing with Chrome extensions, for instance, is you can kind of right click them, inspect it, and see exactly what they're doing. You can even check the source code. So it's one of those things where it's fully transparent. As far as privacy goes, the extension actually does, and this is something that, the second we started talking about data, and this is why we were at the very, very beginning, we were a bit hesitant with the data messaging, because people hear data and they think, oh, they're crowdsourcing like my personal data. And I'm not just talking about like random people that heard about the project. I'm talking about some like very influential people who are very, very smart founders of like big projects and things like that, who just automatically people see data and they see like a Chrome extension or an app on a phone or something like that. They automatically assume it's their data. I guess I'm just going to reiterate the fact that we don't care about personal data. We don't use it. The extension cannot see any of it. It's almost like sitting on the roof of the house. Like you're setting up like this antenna on the roof of your house to go and like probe streets and things like that. You're not, it never comes into the house, if that makes any sense. All it's doing is like browsing public websites and like recording information that's on them. So things like blogs, things like forums, stuff like that, like prices of things on like Walmart. You're not gonna, So it has nothing to do with personal data. Can't see any of it either. And you can actually see that as well, like on the Chrome extension page. I think it tells you like the only thing it collects is your location information, and that's something that we actually need for routing. Like in order to route these requests through nodes across the world, we have to know where they are, right? So that's the only thing that it's really recording is like the geolocation. So yeah,
I think that was I think you guys tackled that very well initially, because I remember that being one of the, I mean, people in crypto call everything FUD, but there was kind of a lot of pushback on that, and I think from someone who isn't technical, being able to just click on that Chrome extension and sort of understand what's happening under the hood helped a lot. You touched on kind of the points and the point system. You guys have recently went through like a big change in how that point system works. There's now these epochs, and there's more thought around kind of the referrals and how those points accrue. Could you touch on the reasoning for that change? I mean, I feel like every project in crypto who attempts a point system suddenly has to become like an expert in game theory and kind of just psychological behavior. How did that go for you guys? What was the reasoning behind some of these changes?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had this initial closed alpha, and I guess you can see that in the dashboard. You go to the rewards page. That lasted a few months, and that was kind of our bootstrapping phase. And during that closed alpha, and the reason we've switched, like we started like this epoch system for the beta, was because every time we push out something new, some sort of new feature, whether it's something you can't see on the back end or something that's new on the front end that changes the level of engagement with the product, we want to record like who the early contributors were and how early were they, and sort of segregate them in that matter. And at the same time, it does create a certain level of excitement about, okay, I'm going to get in before this epoch ends, right? It does give things a deadline. And, we understand, like, and we're happy with, how patient our community has been during this, prolonged beta phase. But having things to look forward to, kind of alleviates some of that, if you know what I mean. Like, makes it a bit easier to, or increases, some level of engagement. But yeah, during the closed alpha as well. And the reason we labeled it a closed alpha is because we did not expect the growth to be that quick. And I think a lot of people probably realize, there were a bunch of things, when we scaled that big, we have to take our systems down, upgrade them, because our user count doubled. So we upgraded the crap out of everything, and then the user count would double again. Then we have to take things down again. And then anyway, so the closed alpha was sort of that scaling phase. And now this beta period is the feature phase.
Okay. That makes sense. I remember seeing the switch, but I wasn't exactly sure what it entailed. I'm wondering, a fun question that I like to ask founders, because I think it's a difficult one to answer. Obviously, every product or every team has haters. They always have people throwing stones for the sake of throwing stones. And I think that a fun exercise for the founder and for me as well, just to hear, is what is some valid FUD do you think that could pose a hindrance to Grass's development in the future? Of all the data privacy aside, we kind of know that you guys don't care about personal data. That's not very much of a concern. What's some stuff that you think will be challenges for you guys in the future?
Honestly, so even though we've grown to a point where we're one of the biggest crypto protocols, we're not big enough yet, if you know what I mean. So our network achieves the scale that we actually want, or the scale at which we can literally just map the entire internet and start indexing everything. Quite a bit further down the line from now. So I'd say probably just it would continue to be scaling. So yeah, we're very, very happy that we've reached this size, and now it's time for the next 10x in growth, essentially.
Yeah, 10x from already being the biggest crypto protocol would definitely be exciting for all of us to see, I think. I believe this question was answered in the past somewhere, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Do you guys have an idea of how much, without looking at actually like having ownership of the network or anything of that nature. Just like the pure bandwidth that a user doesn't use that Grass picks up on and is able to then resell. What does that look like on like a per month basis per user? Like how much is that selling for?
Yeah, so that really depends on, like I mentioned earlier, like the scale of the network and the type of data that you're actually able to access. So as the network grows, you're able to unlock varying use cases. You can probably go online and look up what what public web data sets sell for, calculate how much like that costs in resources to scrape, and then kind of figure it out from there. It's really difficult to give exact figures just because it depends on the industry, really. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. And then you talked a little bit about like the vision, or I guess the goal, the longer term goal of expanding from just being the data collection stack, or the component of the AI stack that does data collection. Is there some other stuff that's going on like further down the pipeline that's in terms of like how the data is being used, not related to Grass necessarily, just how other AI companies are kind of using the data that you particularly find to be compelling or exciting?
Yeah. So one of the really cool things about being able to access a lot more data than most people are able to is when an AI foundation comes out with a really cool new open source model that solves like a very interesting problem. And sometimes it doesn't have to be solving a problem. Sometimes it can be like just a really fun chatbot to play around with or something like that, or some utility tool. Um, the benefit of having access to like 10 times more data is that you can effectively make that model 10 times better. So we're working with a few AI labs right now where they're seeing some of their competitors come out with like really cool models, but the models are quite small. And they're saying, hey, what if we scale this? How much better can we make it? So they're taking these fun projects, bringing them to us and saying, okay, this is what we want to build, but we want to build it with like a lot more data, fine-tuned with a lot more data, or rather, or even in some cases, actually, like there's one that approached us about like, they're building a corpus for a foundational model. And by that, I mean like a massive, like a vast like pool of data that would go into like a foundational LLM. And they're missing data for languages that are not English, for instance, and these are things that we're actually able to provide. So like I think one of the most exciting things about being or being part of a network that's actually able to access like this much data is the fact that you can take anything built in the AI space, and unless it was built by Google or OpenAI, like just make it way cooler than it already is. So so that's pretty exciting.
I think I see the connection that you're making there. I think yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think the progression for better AIs against like large competitors who already own their own data set kind of it levels the playing field a bit for these other AI models.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
I know we don't want to touch on kind of networks or anything like that, but you guys had some. I found it interesting you cited HiveMapper as an example, and also some of you guys launched with the Solana mobile phone. How did that go? What was the reasoning behind that? Is it going to expand to kind of other phones and operating systems?
Yeah. So we finished building mobile around the time that we started seeing explosive growth for the for the web extension. And at that time we said, okay, if we launch mobile right now, the network is going to increase by orders of magnitude, just because globally, like most people just do everything on their phone. And we figured, okay, maybe our systems aren't quite ready for that yet. And it turns out, there's this really unique and really fascinating concept of a crypto phone being out there. And we thought, hey, this is the perfect audience for us because it's a phone that'll, literally the whole point of the phone is to help you monetize things that you already have. And that sort of fits right within our thesis. And secondly, given the supply of these phones is capped, it's a perfect testing ground for our mobile application, because it's very difficult to roll back features once it's in the hands of millions of people. We launched the beta on the Solana on the Saga phone, and we're pretty excited that we're currently on. I think we're on over 2/3 of those phones at the moment. We also did a giveaway. The Saga team has been great to work with. Honestly, shout out to them. Nothing but good things to say about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting initiative. I think, like you said, having 2/3 of that ecosystem is an interesting feat. Are there any plans to kind of expand the mobile process? How did it perform in that kind of limited testing?
Yeah, honestly, worked great. And there are plans to launch Android fairly soon. iOS would probably be a bit later down the line, but for now, the only way to get on mobile is through the Saga phone.
Cool. I think since I'm already on the topic of asking questions I shouldn't, there is, the community is very patient. And we've had a lot of teams on the show that kind of have point systems, have kind of plans for certain things. And I won't touch on those, but what I like to ask those people is, you're in the crypto sphere. There's the idea of decentralization. I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on governance. Maybe there's some models that you've enjoyed that you've seen in the past. Maybe there's some DAOs or different orgs that you participate in. Just kind of hearing your thoughts on decentralization and governance.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic. So I think, decentralized governance is something that's quite important for a lot of different applications. For some, it might not be as necessary as it is for others. And I also think it's important to kind of create or decide where you're going to divide what the tech is going to do autonomously and what people are going to vote on, if you know what I mean. So one example of that would be the way we approach things is we like to do everything in an integrated manner. I think the fact that we want to capture the data layer as a whole, as opposed to just building within a small part of that, kind of speaks to it. Somebody could, in theory, go and build a data collection protocol where they're incentivizing people to go and figure out how they're going to do it, and then start submitting data to some sort of validator system or something like that. And then you have a bunch of you have to deal with a bunch of biases with respect to what data is good, what isn't, etc. We feel that it makes the most sense to make participation in these types of networks as seamless as possible. So if you want to go and get some exposure to AI, for instance, AI is kind of, you can look at AI from two directions. There's the compute and then there's data, right? On the compute side, when it comes to crypto, for instance, there's millions of DPINs out there right now that are solving the really important problem of sourcing compute for not just AI models, but image rendering and what else, right? Because there's a massive supply chain issue in the world. And then on the data side, that's what we're building. And if someone wants to go in and participate in that, we want somebody who doesn't have experience in building crawlers and scrapers or in fine-tuning models or anything else like that. We want to give them an opportunity to come and participate in something like that, because it is something that's important. It impacts literally everyone in the world. And why wouldn't we, if we're able to, give people the opportunity to do this? So that's why we're looking at things like I mentioned earlier, putting an AI agent into these nodes to actually go and conduct a lot of the scraping activity, for instance, and allowing people to just passively go in, set up a node on the device that they already have, or potentially a piece of hardware that we might issue in the future, and just let it sit and rest and be part of the AI stack. And when it comes to governance, the types of things that you end up having this kind of, if it's set up properly, you have this meritocratic decision-making process of what are we going to scrape and why, and what's going to bring the most net benefit to the community as a whole. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. You touched on the agents. Can you explain a little bit more on you said basically that they'd be kind of automating the scraping process for users. Could you explain kind of like from a high level, maybe what else these agents could do? I've heard of some other ecosystems that are developing these kinds of agents, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean that's it for now, right? The thing with AI agents, and like a lot of people don't really realize this, is like an LLM is very good at doing a specific task if you fine tune it to do that. Like the capabilities are almost endless when it comes to certain areas. What they have issues with now, and what some very very big like research organizations are actively like spending billions of dollars on solving, is chaining LLMs. Like have one LLM finish a task, feed the output to the next one, and so on and so forth. If you think about, when you're using, I don't know, some chatbot, for instance, right? Something that you could probably, how often does it give you a wrong answer or an answer that you didn't really want? The answer is like, it could be something like 10%, right? It could be more, it could be less, but like, let's say it's around 10%. Imagine you have to do a task that requires like 4 steps that are dependent on one another. Imagine that 10% error propagating through to the 4th round, like 4 times, right? Like the probability of success ends up being quite low. The probability of it actually doing what you needed it to do becomes very low, because 90% chance when you're actively giving it feedback and like working with it is probably fine, and you can kind of live with that. But it's very difficult to actually do things efficiently when you're chaining LLMs to each other. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to have a single LLM that is solving this one process of structuring this data and transforming it into everything else in one go. So that when I say AI agent, like that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. Are there plans to kind of incorporate some level of compute power in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So right now we're looking at CPU. We are exploring the ideas of hardware. The LLMs that we're looking at training right now are actually pretty like they're pretty low in terms of like technical specifications. Like they're fairly small models. It wouldn't be like calling GPT-4 like on an external server or something like that. It would be something that could run locally, so quite small and not super GPU intense or anything like that. But it's definitely something that we kind of have our eyes on, as so it wouldn't necessarily be like our focus is on data, right? And if compute becomes something that is additive to our network, that's something that we'll explore. But yeah, that's kind of the way we view it.
Are there any kind of compute ecosystems or projects that you guys are kind of close with, enjoy, or feel like are very powerful or interesting?
There's a ton of projects building that space right now, especially at the intersection of crypto. Yeah. I think they're all cool. I could shout out a bunch of them, but like one that I think is like probably underrated, or rather like isn't getting the attention that it deserves yet, but it will inevitably, is Ritual. They're building like this execution layer, which is I think pretty cool. And then like all the compute platforms are like they're solving a very very important problem. So from your renders to IONET to whatever, like a cache and like all this other stuff. Yeah, I think they're all pretty cool. We're not, yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Definitely, there's too many interesting things to be watching over there. And as someone, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert at all in any of that stuff, but I try and keep up, and it's not an easy thing to do, that's for sure. We're coming up on time here a little bit. I did have one last question I wanted to ask, more on like the crypto infra side of things. Obviously, like we don't yet have an idea of like where you guys will be launching, but I'm wondering like if you have an idea, or if there are like priorities that you have for like what you're looking for in a chain. So like a good example that I like to throw out is like DYDX when they went from V3 to V4. there, like, as a perp dex, you might, some might assume that they're looking for like scalability or like the ability to put order books on chain or something like that. But no, to them, it was sovereignty. It was being able to create the most custom validator requirements possible. And I found that to be a really interesting design choice. I'm wondering if there's, whether it exists or not on like the current landscape, if there's any like specific features or like any priorities that you guys have when it comes to making that decision.
Yeah. I guess the fact that we launched on the Saga phone is a very strong hint towards where we're launching this project. Obviously, things that we care about: low transaction costs, high throughput, parallelization, and beyond everything else, and something that a lot of people don't really pay attention to is just a good developer experience. And other things that are, always a great bonus is a strong list of ecosystem projects to partner with.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that last criteria, strong list of ecosystem partners, narrows things down quite a bit. Regardless, like, there's good ecosystems don't just grow on trees. I feel like, at least for me, I'm pretty critical when it comes to that stuff. I want to start to wrap up here, but I wanted to just give you a platform for the last couple minutes or so. Should you choose to take it? If there's any closing remarks, any last things you wanted to share about Grass or its vision, or anything you want a user or Grass users to know.
Yeah, even I'll add to this question a bit. Just remember that most of our listeners, including us, are very like in a crypto bubble. So I feel like myself and I feel like everyone watching kind of maybe wants to hear a bit more about like what the experts in AI are interested in, like what you saw on Twitter that was like a good thread, or which is concepts that you thought were interesting. Anything you have there?
Yeah. So sure. One thing that I think is a pretty cool thing in the AI sphere is actually the fact that not a lot of foundations out there are really trying to build the next big foundational model. Like there's a handful of them. By foundational model, I'm talking about like Mistral or like ChatGPT. Most of them are actually building smaller, more specialized models. And a lot of them are iterating and not just producing synthetic data, but like augmenting data in really cool ways. So like having feedback loops for humans to go and actually interact with data and make it better. All these things lend themselves very well to crypto. And I feel like crypto is kind of it's got this lagging indicator feel to it, where it's, all these things, all these huge developments are happening in AI. And then people in the crypto sphere are starting to realize, hey, we can hyper bootstrap these types of mechanisms, like using crypto incentives or crypto economics or whatever it is. And it just increasingly feels like the two spaces are on a collision course, where you're just going to have decentralized AI, and that's going to be a very, very big industry. And one of the cool things I've also been seeing is tons of open source devs just talking about decentralization too, especially in the last few months. And like a ton of them just reaching out to us actually and just saying, hey, love what you're doing. And we're just, really happy to become, official data partners for a few of these. So, yeah.
I love that. I think there's a lot of parts of crypto that are like, or at least with the ethos, that are like kind of phony, I guess you could say, like decentralization probably being one of the bigger ones, like something that is touted around, but not really so much actually in the culture. Open source, or the open source nature of it, is definitely not one of those things. Like, I think that is something that is just, beneficial for everyone involved, creates a more exciting environment, better products, better user experiences. And to see that is also making its way over to AI products like yours, and the ones that you're in contact with, the ones that are reaching out and expressing their support. To me, that's great. That's really good to hear, especially considering like, just how much is going to change with these products in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and just how impactful they're going to be. the keeping open source nature at the center of it is super important. Cool. Well, we're going to start to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Dre, for coming on. This was great. Like I said, we've been Grass supporters for a while. Definitely not going to slow down anytime soon. Looking forward to seeing what's yet to come with Socrates and the network itself, and everything else fun stuff that is still yet to come. And yeah, thanks again. This was great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me again, guys.
Thanks.